I sought this office to restore the soul of America and to make America respected around the world again. We must restore the soul of America. Our nation is shaped by the constant battle between our better angels and our darkest impulses. It's time for our better angels to prevail. Tonight, the whole world is watching America. And I believe at our best, America is a beacon for the globe.
Since taking office, President Biden has organized 2 global summits for democracy, a move that underscores the challenges his country faces in addressing the decline of democracy both domestically and abroad. According to a global poll commissioned by the Alliance of Democracies Foundation among 50,000 respondents in 53 countries, the United States is viewed as a greater threat to democracy than Russia or China, a fact that speaks to the concerning state and appeal of democratic principles. The trend of growing admiration for authoritarian leaders and systems of government, represented by the unpromising red area in the chart displayed here, has been on a steady incline since 2005, according to several international polls. More distressing to the American president is the number of states that are sliding towards or fully returning to authoritarianism, represented by the red bars on this chart, a number that surpasses the sum of previously authoritarian states that recently embraced democratic reforms, which are represented by the green bars on the same chart. The United States, being the ultimate promoter and arbiter of democracy, has itself recently been classified by Freedom House as a backsliding democracy, and by the Economist Intelligence Unit as a flawed democracy. As such, President Biden is faced with a 2-pronged challenge. Domestically, the country is no longer the uncontested role model of freedom and democracy that other nations once admired. Internationally, the United States' increasingly heavy-handed approach to promoting democracy has engendered global disappointment and disdain for the system of government that America long espoused to the rest of the world. We will explore the internal scene a bit later, but we'll start with an overview of U.S. foreign policy and how it contributed to the democracy crisis. This is a map of the Middle East before 1978. With the exception of the Arab-Israeli conflict, this was an expansive, mostly peaceful territory until the Saur Marxist revolution, or coup, took place in Afghanistan. The new leadership quickly moved to enforce state atheism, banning the burqa, closing mosques, banning forced marriages, and promoting equality in educational opportunities for women. The Soviets liked what they saw and decided to help. It started with economic assistance and ended with direct military intervention. The Carter administration concluded that it needed to act. National Security advisors Bigin Brzezinski and Congressman Charlie Wilson convinced the administration and Congress to authorize Operation Cyclone in Afghanistan. It was the largest covert CIA operation in the history of the agency. The Reagan administration and U.S. allies in Europe and the Middle East continued to play active roles in the anti-Soviet operation. It sounded at the time as a great idea. Indoctrinate, train, and arm tens of thousands of angry young Muslims and let them fight the communist Soviet army on your behalf. In 1988, after 8 years of fighting, the Soviets lost. Charlie Wilson celebrated. But 1.5 million Afghanis died, and Al-Qaeda was born. The United States had to send its army to run Afghanistan's democracy. President Bush promised the Afghan people that they will know the generosity of America, but the funds allocated by his administration were instead mostly a clear display of generosity to American military manufacturers and contractors. After 33 years of American management of Afghanistan, it was evident to the Americans why the Soviets were not able to rule that country through economic assistance or through military intervention. President Biden ordered the withdrawal of his forces from a largely bankrupt and dysfunctional Afghanistan. Next, it was Iraq's turn. Both George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr. sent hundreds of thousands of American soldiers to fight the Iraqi army. In 1991, it was because Saddam's soldiers stole incubators from Kuwaiti hospitals and threw the babies on the floor, a story created by PR firms to generate popular support for the Iraq War. Or to get rid of Saddam Hussein, or to protect Iraqi Kurds, or to dismantle imaginary weapons of mass destruction that no one was able to find. An estimated 2 million Iraqis died as a result of the 1991 war, followed by President Clinton's sanctions, followed by the 2003 war declared by the second Bush administration. Then came the Arab Spring. A number of young assistants in the Obama administration, who described themselves as fierce advocates of human rights, lobbied for military intervention in Libya. President Obama obliged. French, British, and Qatari allies participated in a 6-month bombing campaign that was deemed unavoidable after unattributed reports claimed that Colonel Gaddafi distributed Viagra pills to his mercenaries and ordered them to rape every Libyan woman. Libya was destroyed. Tens of thousands died. Gaddafi was killed, and angry young armed Islamists shared control of the country with armed mafia-style gangs. Those Viagra pills reports, useful in providing a pretext for bombing Libya, turned out to be the product of the imagination of some PR agency team once again. Then Syria started. The U.S. did not send its army because the Syrian government had a large and relatively well-equipped army, and also because Russia and China decided for the first time to use their veto power at the UN Security Council. No authorization for military action was possible. Instead, the United States reverted to the Charlie Wilson and Zbigniew Brzezinski Afghanistan strategy of indoctrinating, training, and arming tens of thousands of angry young Muslims. No one in the media, in Congress, at think tanks, or in the White House seemed to hesitate, repeating the already failed Afghanistan story once again. 500,000 Syrians died. Most major cities were heavily damaged by the war, and Syria eventually went bankrupt. But unlike Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, the United States failed to oust the existing government in Syria despite 12 years of trying to do so. Sanctions against Syria, already in place since 1979, were progressively tightened. Additionally, the United States sent 1,000 soldiers to occupy and to withhold Syria's energy and food-rich northeast. By 2022, 90% of Syria's population lived in utter poverty. If you do not follow the news and never heard of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Saddam, or Gaddafi, you surely can still answer the question: what was the U.S. government doing in Afghanistan, or Libya, or Iraq, or Syria? The answer? Promoting democracy. It doesn't really matter who is in the White House, a cold and old neocon vice president, or a sensitive young human rights activist from the left. The United States always uses some modified version of democracy promotion as a pretext to their taking decisions to be actively involved in the affairs of Middle East countries. And this always leads to widespread destruction, millions of refugees, and deaths of hundreds of thousands of mostly innocent people in each of these countries. According to Dennis Ross and to another unnamed senior Obama official, Harvard and Yale graduate Samantha Power was the first and most decisive advocate for aggressive actions in Libya. She really put on the agenda and the use of military power at the time President Obama was not sure. She would keep coming back, even though at first her wishes were not particularly well received. President Biden might not be fully ready to publicly discuss or describe the challenge, but he is surely aware of how democracy and America's democracy promotion are now being perceived internationally. Many Democrats and liberals suggested that the reason many countries move towards authoritarianism is that President Trump had an affinity for authoritarian leaders. But one can see from this chart that the trend away from democracy has been consistent during the Obama, Trump, as well as the Biden years. There is only a minimal difference between Democrats and Republicans. To restore the soul of America and to make America respected again, the president started by choosing a Secretary of State who speaks French. This was well received in France. Mr. Blinken also happens to be a rock guitarist. He has a band that plays Beatles love songs. This was also a refreshing change for progressives who felt that President Trump's conservatives presented an unattractive face of America. But at the hearing for Mr. Blinken's confirmation by the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee, it was clear that Lindsey Graham is delighted with the views of the new and progressive Secretary of State. The old-fashioned hawk was positively gushing when he heard that Mr. Blinken shares his hawkish views on Iran and China. Let's take a quick look at the democracies of the Middle East that the United States has been showcasing for years. Tunisia, the first success story of the Arab Spring, is experiencing daily confrontations between Islamists and a nationalist elected president who later decided that his country can only be ruled in a more authoritarian manner. Lebanon, a country that is barely functioning without a president, a government, or parliament. The bizarre confessional system that the United States recognizes as a democracy has completely broken down. What about Iraq? They could not agree on a government 1 year after they voted. Only recently did they do so. Sudan is now without a clear leader. Like many other Middle Eastern countries, there is a competition between a relatively secular army and Islamist activists who call for elections that they expect to win. The other Arab Spring success story, Egypt, decided in 2013, and after a brief experiment with democracy, to move back into the control of the army. It was not really functioning before when a democratically elected Islamist party tried to lead. It is no wonder that the people of Iraq wish Saddam Hussein was not removed by the United States. The people of Libya long for the days of prosperity and security when they were ruled by Colonel Gaddafi. And the people of Syria say, I just want to go back to 2010. Much of the Middle East wants to wake up from the long nightmare of democracy promotion. It is not only Iraqis, Libyans, and Syrians who are not impressed with democracy. America's close ally, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, wrote in the New York Times, "Democracy is not in a good shape. The simple right to vote is not enough. Systems need to deliver results for the people. They do not at present. If we truly believe in democracy, the time has come to improve it." Iraqis are not impressed anymore with the theatrics of their right to vote. This candidate's poster is not the main story told by this picture. Egyptians followed the advice of their American friends. They borrowed to grow their economy. But now, the country of 109 million mostly poor Egyptians is almost bankrupt. The Lebanese are also suffering. Their political system is dysfunctional, their banks refuse to allow the people to withdraw their money, and their level of corruption is only matched by corruption levels in the other democracy nearby, Iraq. It is worth diving deeper into Lebanon's confessional democracy, which the United States has been advocating for Syria. A democratic system that is as simple as the Rubik's Cube. Where other democracies are governed by the traditional elected president or prime minister, in Lebanon, the people are loyal to a three-dimensional ruling system. Number 1, loyalty to whatever external power that each admires, typically France, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iran, the United States, or Turkey. Number 2, loyalty to the religious leader of their sect, the mufti, the ayatollah, the patriarch, or Sheikh al-Aql. Number 3, loyalty to the powerful Lebanese family or former warlord that has been ruling their sect for decades, Jumblat, Jaja, Jumayel, Berri, etc. Here is a story that is worth telling. Look at the picture on the top left. It features Lebanese carrying posters of their favorite candidate and the banners of their favorite political party. This picture is from 2006, the first Lebanese election not influenced by the presence of Syrian troops. The coalition that was headed by a Saudi Lebanese citizen called Saad Hariri won. Saad did not have any experience with politics. He did not speak Arabic too well, and he was quite shy. But he was rich and was the choice of America's ally in charge of Lebanon at the time, Saudi Arabia. So his coalition won. He could not function as the prime minister, so instead he named an economist named Fouad Siniora as Lebanon's prime minister. A year later, U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon, Jeffrey Feltman, sent a cable to State Department to share with them an amusing story. He, along with the French ambassador to Lebanon, were laughing that day because they met Saad Hariri, who admitted to them that their choice for Prime Minister of Lebanon, Fouad Siniora, was better than his choice. Feltman explained in that leaked table that Hariri was forced to name Senora as prime minister after strong advice from the French and the American ambassadors to Lebanon. How would you feel about this if you were one of the Lebanese who spent time carrying posters and chanting in the street for your favorite candidate? Tony Blair is right. Democracy is not in a good shape. The simple right to vote is not enough. So, what is democracy? And how far did the United States backslide away from the definition of a full democracy? According to this page that we borrowed from the Global State of Democracy Initiative, democracy is made of many smaller components: electoral participation, civil society participation, judicial independence, freedom of speech, religion and movement, effective parliament, and media integrity. The sum of all these components is the simple state of popular control over public decision-making. Let us keep the above in mind when we investigate further. According to the annual Gallup poll on confidence in U.S. institutions, there has been an accelerated drop in confidence among the American people in most U.S. institutions. Examples: confidence in the presidency is down from 38% in 2021 to 25% in 2022. Confidence in television news is down from 16% in 2021 to 11% in 2022. Confidence in the elected representatives of the American people serving in Congress is down from 12% in 2021 to an incomprehensible 7% in 2022. These are not figures that are easy to ignore. One possible explanation for the almost total lack of trust in mainstream media in the U.S. is the fact that since the 1980s, there has been a relentless process of consolidation of ownership and power of American media outlets. In 1983, 50 companies owned 90% of U.S. media. In 2023, about 7 corporations own enough shares to control 90% of the media. It is worth noting that the media, just like Congress, is losing the confidence of the American people at an accelerating rate, as one can see from the chart of Gallup polls on confidence in media from the high of 51% in the late 70s to the low of 11% for television and 16% for newspapers in 2022. How bad is it that very few control what the American public reads or sees? Consider this story that received intense coverage in the media: the complicated history behind Will Smith's Oscar slap. Then try to evaluate the significance of this other story that received negligible coverage in the media. The Pentagon failed its 5th audit in a row. If you are not convinced yet that this is more worthy of your attention than Will Smith's Oscar slap, the value of the unaccounted funds according to Yahoo Finance is $35 trillion. Another casualty of media outlets consolidation is that media freedom and free expression of opinion is at risk in the United States. Try to oppose a war, and you will quickly find out that most of mainstream media finds you to be a traitor, an enemy of human rights, or a useful idiot who is used by America's enemies. In 2003, several Hollywood celebrities tried to oppose the Iraqi war. At the time, the conservative newspapers described these celebrities, like Susan Sarandon, as Saddam lovers. In 2019, the roles were reversed, as right-wing media outlets complained that the liberal mainstream media was accusing former presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard of being groomed by Putin as a Putin asset and as an Assadist because she called for ending the war in Syria. Rolling Stone magazine listed some of the more common ways mainstream media, journalists, and other activists described anyone who opposed wars. The list includes purity testers, Russia denialists, false balancers, false equivalencers, whataboutists, and ultimately, Team Putin. The term whataboutist is intended to silence anyone who suggests that the United States government might at times be guilty of whatever it accuses its enemies and adversaries of. This is how the practice of shaming critics of the U.S. government becomes mainstream. President Kennedy himself was a believer in not isolating the people from ideas. He said, "For a nation that is afraid to let its people judge the truth and falsehood in an open market is a nation that is afraid of its people." Next, let's look at the economy. Listen to any of Bernie Sanders' speeches, and you will hear him mention the following shocking statistics about the widening income gap in the United States. Today, 3 people own more wealth than the bottom 165 million Americans. The top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. Since 1975, over $50 trillion in wealth has been redistributed from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. You still do not see anything alarming? Let's look at the simplest way of describing a functional democracy, where popular control over public decision-making takes place. So, how much control does the U.S. public have over the decisions of its government? According to this study by Princeton and Northwestern University, which was featured by the BBC's website as their must-read, the answer is almost zero control. For those of you who read academic studies, please download and read the methodology and findings of that research project. The 3 charts on this slide make it clear that there is absolutely no correlation between average citizens' preferences and government decisions taken, as one can see from the flat black line in the graph on the left. In comparison, there is a very clear correlation between the economic elite preferences and government decisions taken. There is also a clear correlation between the wishes of interest groups and government decisions taken. The large study based its finding on analysis of the data available on 1,779 U.S. government policy issues. So, there is no popular control over the decisions of the government. The study defined the U.S. as an oligarchy, not as a democracy. To summarize, democracy in the United States continues to get passing grades in many subcategories. Elections do take place, there are freedoms of religion and expression, but it seems that there are major failures. There is corruption, the media is not free, Congress does not have the trust of the American people, and the public has no control over decision-making of its government. So how are the people reacting? Is there widespread discontent? Compare the 2.7% of the popular vote that the Change candidate Ralph Nader received when he ran for president in year 2000 to the near 50% that the Change candidates have been receiving since 2008 when President Obama ran and won on a platform of Yes, We Can. President Trump and Bernie Sanders, both promising sweeping changes to the system of government, also received close to 50%. Close to 50% of the American people are voting for revolutionary change in their country. Here is a YouGov/The Economist opinion poll with an alarming result. Only 46% of Americans were absolutely sure that the government is not inserting microchips in those COVID vaccines that the people were encouraged or forced to take. The remaining 54% had varying degrees of doubt that their government is evil enough to insert microchips that would control them like robots. So, is democracy really in need of an update like Tony Blair suggested? Isn't the American Constitution flawless? The Constitution is still a great document, but remember that 82 years after its introduction, the people realized that slavery is not that consistent with their noble standards of human rights. Another 50 years later, the people realized that women, or 50% of the population, should be allowed to vote. Then, another 45 years later, in 1965, Black Americans were really allowed to vote. There is always a time for improvement. Perhaps those who have great intentions, and there are many in the United States, can start by redefining their country's disastrous foreign policy, especially its active and usually highly destructive democracy promotion projects. Remember George Washington's advice. My tenets are few and simple, the leading one of which is to be honest and just to ourselves and to exact it from others, meddling as little as possible in their affairs where our own are not involved. If this maxim was generally adopted, war would cease and our swords would soon be converted into reap hooks and our harvests be more peaceful, abundant, and happy. Not everything around this planet is a serious threat to America's national interests or to its national security. President Kennedy's Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War, Robert McNamara, eventually admitted that we exaggerated the dangers to the United States of the actions of our adversaries. We see what we want to believe. Instead of waging a 12-year-long regime change war in Syria, the United States can focus on its own challenges. A recent poll shows that already 48% of companies using ChatGPT say that they have fired employees to replace them with the AI tool. So, is the United States an evil thug? No, it is not. Americans donate to charity more than most nations. The U.S. government is made of mostly well-intentioned people who are doing their job. President Carter is a shining example of the goodness of the United States, despite all the unfortunate decisions he took when he was president. But this is a moment in history where a correction is needed, a real correction, and not just a facelift, if President Reagan's shining city on a hill metaphor is to be real and not purely delusional.
I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still. And how stands the city on this winter night? More prosperous, more secure, and happier than it was 8 years ago. But more than that, after 200 years, 2 centuries, she still stands strong and true on the granite ridge, and her glow is held steady no matter what storm. And she's still a beacon, still a magnet for all who must have freedom, for all the pilgrims from all the lost places who are hurtling through the darkness toward home. We've done our part, and as I walk off into the city streets, a final word to the men and women of the Reagan Revolution, the men and women across America who for 8 years did the work that brought America back. My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time. We made a difference. We made the city stronger. We made the city freer. And we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all. And so, goodbye. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.